Danny Reeves had never seen so many different types of aliens in one room. Before, the briefing hall at Valter Station held over 200 cadets from across the galaxy, and he was one of only 5 humans in the entire intake. His grandmother back in Montana would have loved this. She always said the universe was bigger than anyone imagined. Instructor Halon stepped onto the platform. The Valmik was built like a tank with gray skin that looked like it could stop bullets and scars that told stories of battles Danny could only imagine. His voice boomed across the hall without any need for amplification. Welcome to planetary survival training. Most of you will fail, some of you will quit, a few of you might die if you're stupid enough. Halon's eyes scanned the crowd. The planet below us is Verdara 7. Beautiful jungle world, also home to 43 species that can kill you in under 10 seconds. A holographic display flickered to life behind him. Dense jungle canopy, towering trees, and somewhere in all that green, dangers that made Danny's palms sweat just looking at the footage. Your teams will drop in a zone 4 for 1 week. Build shelter, find food, reach 3 checkpoints. Simple enough that even you fresh recruits should manage. Halon tapped a control and a map zoomed in. A red section appeared on the eastern edge. Zone 7 is absolutely off limits, no exceptions, no excuses. The hologram shifted to show a creature that made several cadets gasp. It stood 9 ft tall with 6 powerful legs, armored hide that gleamed like black metal, and retractable claws as long as Danny's forearm. The head was broad and intelligent looking, with eyes that tracked movement in the footage. This is a razor claw, apex predator, pack hunter, highly territorial. Zone 7 is their nesting ground. Halon's expression went hard. In the past 10 years, 17 trained soldiers have died trying to cross razor claw territory. These creatures don't run, they don't negotiate, they kill anything that threatens their pack. Danny leaned forward in his seat. The creature looked terrifying, sure, but there was something else in the footage. The way it moved around smaller versions of itself, cubs maybe, the protective stance. He'd seen that exact same behavior in the bears and mountain lions his grandmother rehabilitated back home. Questions? Halon asked that a cadet near the front, a feline-looking Felrothi named Breck, raised his hand. What if we encounter one outside zone 7? You run. If you can't run, you fight. If you can't fight, you die. Halon shrugged, preferably in that order. The briefing ended with team assignments. Danny found himself grouped with Shira, a Chitauri whose compound eyes gave her a permanently startled expression. Alan, a slow-moving Saurian who barely spoke, and Breck, who had already started complaining about being stuck with inferior hunters. They boarded the drop shuttle 12 hours later. Danny checked his gear one more time. Standard survival pack, medical kit, emergency beacon, 1 week of rations, and a basic multi-tool. No weapons. This was a survival test, not combat training. The shuttle dropped them in a clearing near the Zone 4 border. The moment the doors opened, humidity hit Danny like a wet blanket. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and something else he couldn't identify. Alien world, alien jungle. His heart hammered in his chest. We should establish camp here, Alan said slowly, his reptilian voice like gravel in a mixer. Too exposed, Breck countered. Any predator could spot us, then we Move in a denser cover, Shira suggested, her voice high and musical. Find water source first, yes, they argued for 20 minutes before finally moving. Danny mostly stayed quiet, learning how his team worked together, which was to say they barely worked at all. Breck wanted to lead but made reckless choices. Alan was cautious too. The point of paralysis, Shira tried to keep peace but had no authority. By the way, nightfall on the first day, they had a rough shelter and had located a stream. Breck had led them through a patch of stinging insects that left all of them covered in painful welts. Morale was low. Danny took first watch while the others slept. The jungle at night was alive with sound, calls and rustles, and movements in the darkness that his human eyes couldn't quite track. He sat with his back against the tree and thought about home, about his grandmother teaching him to approach injured animals. Patience, she always said. Let them come to you. Around midnight, he heard something different. Not the general noise of the jungle, but something specific, a high-pitched sound, almost like crying. It came from beyond their camp perimeter, from the direction of Zone 7. Danny knew he should wake. The others knew he should ignore it. Knew that curiosity killed the cat, and he was a long way from having 9 lives, but that sound, it reminded him of the wolf pups he had found trapped in a irrigation ditch back home, the desperate crying of something young and scared and hurt. He grabbed his flashlight and moved quietly through the undergrowth. The sound grew louder. 20 m. From Camp 30, he was crossing into dangerous territory now, breaking rules that existed for very good reasons. Then he saw them. 3 razor claw cubs huddled in a collapsed burrow near the Zone 7 boundary marker. They were already the size of wolves, with developing armor plates and small but sharp-looking claws. One of them was trapped under a fallen tree branch, its leg caught at an awkward angle. The cub saw Danny and went silent. 6 eyes locked onto him, even young, even scared. They looked dangerous. That Danny's common sense screamed at him too. Back away slowly. These were the children of creatures that killed trained soldiers. Their mother was probably nearby. This was the exact kind of stupid decision that ended careers or lives. But that smallest cub, the one with its leg trapped, looked up at him with eyes that held pain and fear and something that looked almost like hope. Danny crouched down slowly, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. The cubs watched his every movement. The 2 free ones positioned themselves between Danny and their trapped sibling. Small rumbling sounds coming from their throats, protective, brave, exactly what his grandmother would have called good survival instincts. Easy now, Danny whispered, keeping his voice low and calm. I'm not going to hurt you, promise. He had no idea if they understood tone the way Earth animals did, but it was worth trying. The cubs tilted their heads, their rumbling quieting slightly. Good sign, maybe. The trapped cub whimpered, again struggling against the branch. Danny could see the problem. The tree had fallen across the entrance to their burrow, creating a collapse that pinned the smallest cub's hind leg, not crushed thankfully, but definitely stuck and probably injured. Danny pulled off his pack and dug through it. He found 2 emergency glow sticks and cracked them, placing them on the ground to free his hands. The soft green light made the cub's eyes reflect like mirrors, beautiful and eerie at the same time. Danny grabbed his multi-tool and Approached the branch carefully. The two free cubs growled louder. Danny stopped, held up his empty hands, then very slowly reached for the branch again. They watched but didn't attack. Good. Cubs, smart cubs, I just need to move. This okay? The branch was heavy, but not impossible. Danny wedged his multi-tool under it as a lever point, then found a sturdy stick to use as the lever arm. Basic physics his grandmother had taught him while moving boulders on the ranch. Leverage beats strength every time. He pushed down on the lever. The branch shifted slightly. The trapped cub squeaked in alarm. Danny stopped. Immediately, saw the I know it. Hurts just a bit more. He repositioned and tried again, this time lifting more. Gradually, the branch rose inch by inch. The trapped cub's leg came free with a soft pop. Danny quickly kicked the branch to the side before it could fall back. The freed cub scrambled backward on 3 legs, keeping the injured one raised. It huddled with its siblings, all 3 now watching Danny with intense focus. Danny sat back on his heels and waited. Let them make the next move. That was the rule with frightened animals. You helped, then you backed off and let them decide what happened next. His stomach growled, reminding him he had skipped dinner to avoid Brex. Complaining, Danny pulled out one of his ration bars and unwrapped it. The smell made the cubs' noses twitch. They sniffed the air, curious. He broke off a small piece and held it out at arm's length. Hungry, the cubs looked at each other in a way that seemed almost like communication. Then the smallest one, the one Danny had just freed, took 3 limping steps forward. Its siblings chirped in alarm, but it ignored them. Danny held perfectly still. The cub stretched its neck out, sniffed his hand thoroughly, then very gently took the food in its mouth. It chewed, swallowed, then looked at Danny with what might have been surprise. Good, right? High protein. Tastes terrible to me, but you seem to like it. The other 2 cubs crept forward. Danny broke off more pieces, feeding each one. Their claws, which had seemed so threatening before, retracted when they took food from his palm. Careful, deliberate. These creatures had fine motor control that the military briefings never mentioned. The injured cub sat down in front of Danny, holding out its hurt leg. An invitation, or maybe a request. Danny examined the leg carefully. Swollen but not broken. Some bruising under the armored plates. It needed support to heal properly. I got something for this. Danny dug out his medical kit and found the elastic bandage. His grandmother had taught him how to wrap sprains on everything from horses to raccoons. The principle should be the same. He worked slowly, talking the whole time, explaining what he was doing, even though the cubs obviously couldn't understand English. The tone mattered. The calm mattered. The injured cub sat still and let him wrap its leg, only flinching once when Danny accidentally pulled too tight. There, that should help. Keep weight off it for a few days if you can. The 3 cubs sat in a semicircle around Danny now, their earlier fear seemingly forgotten. One of them started making a purring sound, deep and rumbling. The others joined in. The sound vibrated in Danny's chest. Then he heard something else, heavy footsteps, lots of them, moving through the jungle toward their location. The cubs heard it too. Their purring stopped instantly. They began calling out high-pitched chirps that carried through the night air. That Danny's blood went cold. The mother had to be. Cubs were calling their pack. He should run right now, sprint back to camp and Hope the adults didn't follow. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to move, but the injured cub couldn't run, it could barely walk. If Danny ran now, would the mother think he had attacked them? Would she hunt him across Zone 4? Or worse, would she abandon the injured cub because it couldn't keep up with the pack? The footsteps grew louder, closer. Trees rustled and swayed. Something very large was approaching. Danny made a decision that would either save his life or end it. He stood up, scooped the injured cub into his arms, and started walking toward the sound. The cub squeaked in surprise but didn't struggle. The other two followed at his heels, chirping excitedly through the morning mist that had started to roll in. Danny saw her. The mother Razorclaw emerged from between two massive trees, and she was even bigger than the hologram had shown. 9FT at the shoulder, muscles rippling under armor plates, claws that gleamed in the glow stick light. Her eyes locked onto Danny. She saw her cub in a stranger's arms, and she stopped moving entirely. Danny stopped too, his heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He very carefully, very slowly knelt down and set the injured cub on the ground. It limped toward its mother, chirping the whole way. The mother's eyes never left Danny's face. The mother Razorclaw lowered her massive head and sniffed her cub carefully. She examined the wrapped leg, then looked at the other two cubs, who were climbing over each other to reach her. Her rumbling was different from the cubs, deeper and more complex. Danny could hear multiple tones layered together, like she was communicating something specific. The injured cub chirped back, then did something that made Danny's breath catch. It turned around, limped back to Danny, and rubbed its head against his knee before returning to its mother. The mother went completely still again. Her eyes, which Danny now realized were more golden than yellow, studied him with an intensity that felt like being scanned by a machine. She was thinking, processing, making a decision about whether this strange, soft creature was a threat. Danny kept his hands visible and stayed low, non-threatening, submissive even. Every prey instinct his body told him to look away, to break eye contact, but he also knew that with predators, sometimes looking away meant you were hiding something. I just wanted to help, he said quietly. Your baby was hurt. Mother took one step forward, then another. She was close enough now that Danny could feel the heat radiating from her body, could smell something like cinnamon and wet earth, close enough that one swing of those claws would end him. She lowered her head until her nose was inches from Danny's face. One breath, two. She was reading him, somehow gathering information in ways he couldn't understand. Then she made a sound, low, rumbling, not aggressive, almost questioning. Yeah, Danny whispered. We're good, right? The mother backed up 3 steps and sat down, her cubs immediately swarming her. She rumbled again, a different tone, and began grooming them with a long, rough-looking tongue. Normal parent behavior. She was settling back into routine, treating Danny like he was no longer a threat. Danny's legs shook as adrenaline drained from his system. He had just survived an encounter that killed trained soldiers by being gentle, by helping cubs instead of running, by treating her like an intelligent creature instead of a mindless killing machine that he needed to get back to camp before his team woke up and found him gone. But as he stood up slowly, the mother's head swiveled toward him, watching, not threatening, just observing. Danny backed away carefully, then turned and headed toward camp. Behind him, he heard the cubs chirping, and the mother's rumbling response. Sounds of a family reunited. He made it back just as the first hints of dawn colored the sky. His teammates were still asleep. Danny slipped into his shelter and lay down, his mind racing. Too fast for rest. The next 2 days of the survival exercise passed in a blur of failed shelter improvements and arguments between Breck and Elaine. They reached the first checkpoint but missed the second due to Breck's overconfidence, leading them into a ravine they had to backtrack from. Shira kept giving Danny odd looks but said nothing till on the third night. Danny volunteered for late watch again. Once his team was asleep, he grabbed his remaining ration bars and headed back toward the Zone 7 border. The cubs were waiting for him, all 3 of them sitting at the tree line like they had been expecting company. The injured one's leg looked better already, the swelling down. They chirped excitedly when they saw him and bounded over. Danny laughed quietly and sat down cross-legged. He distributed ration bars, watching them eat with obvious enjoyment. Clearly human food. Agreed with them. Movements in the shadows made him tense, but it was just the mother. She approached closer this time, settling down about 10 feet away. Watching, learning, Danny offered her a ration bar. She sniffed it, then delicately took it from his hand. Her tongue was surprisingly gentle. This became his routine. Every night he visited, every night the cubs and their mother were there. Danny started learning their body language. Ears forward meant curious, tail low, and swishing meant playful. A specific rumble from the mother meant the cubs needed to settle down. The mother started bringing things to strain. Fruits from deep in Zone 7 that tasted sweet and tangy. A chunk of honeycomb still buzzing with alien insects that Danny had to politely decline. Once a dead creature that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard. Danny understood she was trying to feed him. Fair exchange. He named her Big Mama in his head, though he would never say it out loud. The cubs he called Scout, Bruiser, and Tiny. Based on their personalities, Scout was the curious one, always investigating. Bruiser was the bold one who fought constantly. Tiny was the one Danny had rescued, smaller than the others but clever and quick. On the 5th night, Shira followed him. Danny didn't realize she was there until he was already sitting with the cubs. Scout was trying to steal his flashlight while Bruiser wrestled with Tiny, and Big Mama watched with what Danny swore was amusement. By the ancestors, Shira breathed from behind a tree. Her compound eyes reflected the flashlight beam. The cubs spun toward her. Growling, Big Mama stood up, protective. "It's okay," Danny said quickly to both the razor claws and Shira. "She's a friend, part of my pack." He gestured for Shira to approach slowly. She did, her movements careful and deliberate. The cubs watched but didn't attack. Big Mama rumbled a warning but didn't advance. "How?" Shira asked, her voice full of wonder. "I helped them." They remembered. Turns out the galaxy's most dangerous predators understand kindness. Shira sat down next to Danny, keeping her movements small. Scout approached her cautiously, sniffed her thoroughly, then chirped. Bruiser and Tiny crowded in, too curious about this new visitor. "This is impossible," Shira said. "Yeah," Danny agreed, "but it's happening." Big Mama settled back down, though her eyes stayed on Shira, testing, evaluating, deciding if this New stranger was safe. Shira pulled out one of her own rations and offered it to Scout. The cub took it gently, the same way they took food from Danny. My people were almost wiped out in a war. Shira said quietly, we learned that enemies can become allies if someone is brave enough to try peace first. Danny nodded. Same lesson, different species. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by creatures that should have killed them, sharing food and building something the military briefing said was impossible. The emergency beacon shrieked across all frequencies 2 hours before dawn on day 6th. Danny jerked awake in his shelter, fumbling for his communicator. Beside him, Breck and Alan were doing the same. Shira was already on her feet. All cadets, this is command, instructor. Halon's voice cut through the static. Medical emergency in Zone 5. Cadet down with severe injuries. Magnetic storm preventing aerial extraction. Ground team moving through Zone 7. In 90 minutes, stay clear the route. Command out. Danny's blood went cold. Zone 7. The fastest route from the station to Zone 5 cut straight through Razorclaw territory, through Big Mama's den. Finally some real action. Breck said, stretching, maybe we'll get to see those Razorclaws get put down. They're sending an armed tactical team, Alan added. Standard protocol is eliminate on sight. Danny pulled on his boots with shaking hands. 90 minutes. He had 90 minutes to somehow move Big Mama and her cubs away from the tactical team's path. But how? He couldn't just explain the danger. They were smart, but they didn't speak English. I need to use the facilities, Danny said, grabbing his pack. Be back in a few minutes. He didn't wait for a response. He jogged through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Zone 7 border, with Shira catching up to him halfway there. You're going to warn them, she said. Not a question. The tactical team will kill her. She has cubs to protect. She'll fight. They all die. Then we move them together. Shira's compound eyes caught the first rays of dawn. My vision is better in open spaces. I can help navigate. They reached the den just as the sky shifted from black to deep blue. Big Mama was already awake, her cubs still sleeping in a pile. The den entrance, she rumbled a greeting when she saw Danny, then noticed his body language, tense, urgent. Wrong. Her rumbling changed to a questioning tone. Danny had no idea how to communicate danger to a creature that didn't speak his language. He tried anyway. He pointed toward the direction the tactical team would come from, made aggressive gestures, then pointed at Big Mama and the cubs. He repeated it 3 times. Big Mama watched him carefully. Then she did something that made Danny's hope soar. She rumbled at her cubs. Specific pattern of sounds. They woke immediately and stood at attention. Pack communication. She understood something was wrong. Danny started walking away from the den, deeper into Zone 7, away from the tactical team's route. He pulled out a ration bar and waved it. Come on this way, please. The cubs followed immediately, thinking it was a game. They chirped and bounded after Danny and Shira. Big Mama followed her cubs, but her rumbling was getting more agitated. They were leaving her chosen territory, moving away from her preferred den site. Keep going, Shira urged. We're not far enough yet. They had covered maybe half the distance they needed when Big Mama stopped. Her rumbling turned to a growl. She was not moving any farther from her territory. The cubs stopped too, confused. They looked between their mother and Danny. Unsure who to follow, then they all heard it, footsteps heavy and deliberate. Something else was in these woods, something big, through the trees. Ahead another Razorclaw emerged, male, even larger than Big Mama, with scars across his armored hide and claws that looked like they could tear through steel. His territory they had crossed. Into his territory, the male saw Big Mama with her cubs in his space and roared. The sound shook leaves from the trees. He charged. Big Mama roared back and met him halfway. The two massive predators collided with a sound like thunder. They grappled, claws screeching against armor, both trying to establish dominance. Get the cubs back, Danny shouted at She-Ra. She herded Scout, Bruiser, and Tiny behind a fallen log, while Danny tried to make himself invisible against the tree trunk. The fight was brutal and fast. Neither Razorclaw was trying to kill the other, but the dominance display was violent enough that Danny worried one of them would get seriously hurt. Big Mama was smaller but faster. The male was stronger but slower. Then the male did something unexpected. He stopped mid-attack. His eyes had found Danny, half hidden behind the tree. Then he looked at the cubs, noticed Tiny's wrapped legs, saw how the cubs stayed near Danny instead of fleeing in terror. The male's rumbling changed. He approached Big Mama slowly, touched his nose to hers in what looked like a question. She rumbled back a long, complex series of sounds. The male turned to Danny and approached. Every muscle in Danny's body locked up. This was it. He had pushed his luck too far. The male lowered his massive head and sniffed Danny thoroughly. The breath was hot and smelled like meat. Those golden eyes studied him with the same intense intelligence Big Mama had shown, making a decision. Then the male did something that made Danny want to cry with relief. He rumbled, turned around, and walked deeper into his territory, but he looked back once, waiting. He's letting us in, She-Ra whispered. He's offering his territory as shelter. Big Mama rumbled at her cubs and started following the male. The cubs followed with Tiny limping over to Danny first and rubbing against his leg before joining the family. Danny and She-Ra followed the Razorclaws deeper in his own 7-in-I territory that no human had ever entered and survived. But they weren't entering as invaders. They were entering as guests, maybe even friends. Behind them, in the distance, Danny heard the rumble of tactical team vehicles. And GT snorts. And GT. They were moving through Big Mama's old den site right now, weapons ready. Expecting resistance, they would find an empty den and probably count it as a lucky break. Instructor Halon would note it in his report as unusual. The Razorclaws had fled from superior firepower. But Danny knew better. The Razorclaws hadn't fled. They'd been warned by someone who cared enough to help, and they had chosen to trust that help. Male led them to a larger den carved into the side of a rocky outcrop. He rumbled at Big Mama, then at the cubs, then once at Danny before disappearing into the jungle. Patrol maybe, or hunting. Big Mama settled her into the new den and looked at Danny. Her rumbling was different now, warmer. She touched her nose to his hand, then laid down with her cubs piled around her. Safe. The survival exercise ended at noon on day 7. Danny's team finished in the middle of the rankings, not great but passing. The injured cadet from Zone 5 was stable and recovering in the medical bay. The tactical team had swept through Zone 7 without encountering a single razor claw, which Instructor Halon noted as statistically unusual but ultimately fortunate. Danny stood in the shuttle bay with his team, waiting to board the transport back to Valter Station. His hand kept going to his pocket where he carried a smooth stone, perfectly round and colored like sunset. Tiny had brought it to him that final night, placing it carefully at his feet like a gift. Shira caught his eye and nodded once. They had agreed to say nothing. What happened in Zone 7 stayed in Zone 7. Nobody would believe them anyway. The shuttle ride back was loud with cadets bragging about their survival skills and complaining about the difficulty. Breck was already planning how he would tell the story to make himself sound more heroic. Alan was simply relieved it was over. Danny stared out the window at the jungle receding below. Somewhere down there, Big Mama and her cubs were safe in their new den. The male razor claw, who Danny had privately named Guardian, was probably teaching the cubs how to hunt. Life going on as it should. Point 2 days later, Danny received a summons to Instructor Halon's office. His stomach dropped. This was it. Somehow they knew that Halon's office was sparse in functional battle commendations on one wall, star charts on another, and a window that looked out over the training grounds. The instructor sat behind a metal desk, his scarred hands folded in front of him. Seat, Cadet. Thieves. Thieves. Danny sat, his spine straight, trying not to show his nervousness. Halon pulled up a holographic display. I've been reviewing exercise data. Something bothered me about the razor claw Dan evacuation. Too convenient, too clean. He tapped the display and thermal imaging appeared. Poor quality, corrupted by the jungle's magnetic fields, but clear enough to show Danny's heat signature surrounded by 4 larger signatures. Danny's mouth went dry. Before I file formal charges for violation of Zone 7 restrictions and unauthorized contact with hostile wildlife, I'm giving you one chance to explain. Halon's eyes were hard but not angry. What happened out there, Cadet? Danny made a decision, the same kind of decision he had made when he chose to help trap cubs instead of walking away. He told the truth, all of it, the trap cubs, the injured leg, the nightly visits, the relationship he built with Big Mama and her family, the emergency evacuation to save them from a tactical team, Guardian's unexpected cooperation. Every detail spilled out like water from a broken dam. Halon listened without interrupting. His expression gave nothing away. Sir, Danny finished. The briefing said razor claws killed 17 soldiers, but it never said why. What if they were just defending their territory? What if every human they met came in armed and treating them like monsters? We never gave them a chance to be anything else. Silence filled the office. Halon stood and walked to the window, hands behind his back. Do you know why I became instructor, Cadet Reeves? His voice was quiet. I killed 7 razor claws during my combat years. Clean kills by the book. Necessary, they said. He turned around. But the last one, she was protecting cubs. I didn't know they had cubs in that sector. She died buying them time to escape. I put 3 rounds through her heart. Halon pulled up another file. On his display, an old mission report. I wrote a recommendation that day. Suggested we study peaceful contact protocols. My superiors buried it. Too expensive, too risky, easier to maintain exclusion zones and shoot on sight. He looked at Danny with something that might have been respect. Your unauthorized actions violated multiple regulations. You could be expelled. He paused. They also might be the most valuable tactical intelligence gathered on Verdara 7 in 2 decades. Danny blinked. Sir, here's what's going to happen. You're going to write down everything, every interaction, every behavioral observation, body language, vocalization, social structure, all of it. Halon closed the thermal image file. With a decisive gesture, this image will be logged as corrupted by magnetic interference. Equipment malfunction happens all the time in Zone 7. You're not expelling me. I'm giving you an assignment. Halon's expression was serious. If razor claws can be approached peacefully, it changes everything about Verdara 7. Opens up entire regions for research, maybe saves lives on both sides. He sat down again. But I need proof. I need protocols. I need something I can take to command that they can't ignore. Danny's mind raced. You want me to develop a contact procedure? I want you to prove that humanity's role in the galactic community isn't just about being another race with guns and ships. Halon pulled up a new file. Every species in the Academy has specialties. The Valmek are warriors, the Saurians are engineers, the Felrathi are hunters, but humans, you people keep trying to make friends with things that should eat you. He showed Danny an image of an Earth dog. Your species took wolves and made them companions. You domesticated creatures that most prey species run from. Maybe that's your real strength. Not technology, not military might. Bridge building. You really think this could work? Danny asked. I think you already made it work. Now I need to see if it's repeatable, if other humans can do what you did. Halon stood, offering his hand. Write the report, Cadet. Make it detailed. If this goes the way I think it could, you might just change how humanity fits into this galaxy. Danny shook his hand, feeling the weight of what Halon was offering, not just forgiveness but opportunity, a chance to prove that compassion was just as valuable as combat skills. That night, Danny sat at his quarters and pulled out the smooth stone Tiny had given him. He set it on his desk next to his data pad and started writing. First contact protocol for Razorclaw interaction. Introduction. The following procedures are based on successful peaceful contact with Verdara 7 apex predators. Core principle: approach with respect, not fear. 3 months later, Danny stood at the edge of Zone 7 again. This time he wasn't alone and he wasn't sneaking. He had official authorization, a small team of specialists and instructor Halon's full support. The team consisted of 5 people: Danny as lead contact specialist, Shira as behavioral observer, and secondary contact Dr. Yina Chitori, xenobiologist who had spent 40 years studying predator species. Instructor Halon himself, unarmed, as military oversight, and surprisingly, Brex, who had demanded to be included. After seeing Danny's contact footage, if a human can make friends with apex predators, Breck had said, his pride clearly wounded. I need to understand how my species are hunters. We should be better at this. They had set up camp at the Zone 7 border 2 days ago. Not intruding, not hunting, just being present. The protocol Danny had written emphasized patience above all else. Let the razor claws make first contact. Prove you're not a threat through an action before attempting interaction. Dr. was fascinated by the waiting period. Most species try to establish dominance immediately. Humans just sit and wait. Your species is very strange. We learned a long time ago that patience works better than force, Danny said, at least when you're trying to make friends instead of enemies. On the morning of day 3, Big Mama came. Danny saw her first emerging from the tree line with all 3 cubs behind her. They were bigger now, nearly half her size, their armor plates fuller and darker. Tiny still had a slight limp, but it had healed well. Scout bounded ahead, recognizing Danny immediately. Nobody moved, Danny said quietly. Let them approach. Scout reached Danny first and rubbed against him hard enough to nearly knock him over. Bruiser and Tiny followed, chirping excitedly. Big Mama approached more slowly, her golden eyes scanning the new humans carefully. She rumbled a greeting at Danny, then turned her attention to the others, especially Breck, whose feline features made her pause. Breck, Danny instructed, sit down. Make yourself small, retract your claws. Breck, to his credit, followed instructions without argument. He sat cross-legged and tucked his hands under his arms, hiding his natural weapons. Big Mama approached him cautiously, sniffed thoroughly, then rumbled, not aggressive, curious, thought Dr. was recording everything, her voice a quiet stream of observations. Subject displays complex social evaluation, testing newcomer before allowing proximity to offspring, sophisticated threat assessment. Shira offered ration bars to the cubs, who took them gently. Big Mama accepted one from Halon, who held it out with hands that had once held weapons against her kind. The irony wasn't lost on Danny. Permission to speak, sir? Danny asked Halon quietly. Granted. She remembers you're not naturally prey-shaped. Valmik are predator species too, but she's accepting the food anyway. That's choice, not instinct. That's intelligence. Halon nodded slowly. Noted. On day 4, the male guardian appeared with 2 other adult razor claws and their own cubs. Big Mama had brought her pack to meet the strange visitors. Dr. nearly dropped her recording equipment in excitement. They're socializing us, she breathed, introducing us to the pack structure. This is unprecedented behavior for apex predators. The cubs played together while the adults observed the humans. Breck, who had finally relaxed, found himself being investigated by a curious cub who seemed fascinated by his retractable claws. When Breck extended them slowly, carefully, the cub chirped and showed its own claws, comparing. Learning. I understand now, Breck said. Quietly, we approach as fellow predators, showing respect, not as prey trying to appease or enemies trying to dominate. We're being accepted as equals. Danny smiled. Exactly. By day 6, the team had documented enough behavioral data to fill months of analysis. The razor claws demonstrated tool use, abstract thinking, complex communication, and most importantly, the capacity for cross-species cooperation. Everything the military's hostile engagement protocols had assumed was impossible. Halon sent his report to Galactic Defense Command with a simple recommendation: redesignate razor claws from hostile wildlife to intelligent indigenous species, open diplomatic channel, establish peaceful coexistence protocols. The response came back within a week, approved pending further study. Danny graduated from the academy 4 months later with honors and a special commendation. But instead of a standard military posting, he received a unique assignment: interspecies relations specialist. His job was to explore peaceful contact with species previously deemed too dangerous for cooperation. Other humans began training in similar protocols. It became Earth's specialty. In the galactic community, humanity had arrived late to galactic civilization, with less advanced technology and smaller numbers than most species, but they brought something valuable: the ability to see potential friends where others only saw threats. On Danny's last day at Valter Station before shipping out to his new assignment, he visited Verdera 7 one final time. Big Mama was there with her cubs now. Nearly fully grown, Tiny had become the pack scout, always first to investigate new things. Scout was learning to hunt. Bruiser was already challenging other juveniles for dominance. Big Mama touched her massive head to Danny's chest, a gesture of trust and affection he had learned meant family, pack, belonging. Danny pulled the smooth stone from his pocket, the one Tiny had given him a month ago. He placed it at the den entrance as a marker, a reminder that here on a jungle planet light years from Earth, a human had proven something important. 6 months later, 3 new Razorclaw packs had made peaceful contact with research stations. They brought gifts in exchange for medical care and protection from poachers. They allowed researchers to study their complex language and social structures. The Razorclaws were teaching their cubs that some strangers could be trusted, and humanity was teaching the galaxy that their greatest weapon wasn't guns or ships. It was the stubborn human belief that any creature, no matter how dangerous, deserved a chance to be understood. Danny received a video file from Verdera 7 1 year after graduation. It showed Tiny now fully grown with cubs of her own, bringing them to a research station. She made the rumbling sound that meant safe pack in, placed a gift at the researcher's feet. A smooth stone, carefully selected, deliberately given. The cycle continuing, trust building trust, friendship creating friendship. One human had helped 3 cubs, and those cubs were now teaching the next generation that not all strangers were enemies. That in the end, that was humanity's contribution to the galaxy. Not conquest, not domination, just the patient, stubborn insistence that making friends was always worth more than making war.